And just so you know,
Yeah.
pronounce my name as Hawes.
Hawes. Did I say
Yeah,
house?
there you
I'm
go.
sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Pfft. It's not the first
Hawes.
time. No, not the first time. Definitely not gonna be the last time. That's for sure.
I would spell it HAA,
I know, I know,
right?
and I also have like it's an accent thing as well. So
Okay.
it's all good.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. I'm going to hit record on the audio only in
Okay.
3, 2, 1. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sandy K Nutrition, Health and Lifestyle Queen. Today with me, I have Brett Hawes, and he is my special guest. And I have recorded with Brett a couple of other times. I'm really excited for this recording because it's just Brett Hawes alone. We're going to talk about a lot of great things. I'm sure that people are going to be interested in this recording. And the best way to describe what Brett does is that he is passionate about both health and activism. Brett is a holistic nutritionist and a certified functional medicine practitioner, with over 20 years of clinical experience at a capacity as a facilitator, an educator, a practitioner, a consultant, and a supplement formulator. His podcasting career began with the show called Holistic Health Masterclass, then the Beyond Health podcast, and now his new show, which is called Onward. Brett dives deep into the realities of our world, including the narratives that we are fed from a health and political perspective. He's worked with the Children's Health Defence Canada, the Natural Health Products Protection Association, NHPPA, who I've recorded with twice as well, with Brett, the Detox Project, and various health freedom networks and organizations. And today, Brett and I are going to be discussing the reality of health freedom, not just in Canada, but what is happening throughout the world. And I honestly cannot think of a better person to have this discussion with today. Brett and I are both Canadians. So I think is it South African? Born?
South African Canadian. Yeah, that's
South
right.
African. See, I remembered. But this is really an important topic, and I'm very, very happy to be connected with you, Brett. And I'm so glad to have you here today. So welcome.
Thanks so much, Sandy. It's great to be here. And yeah, we certainly find ourselves in some interesting times these days, and no shortage of things to discuss. So I'm going to let you, as the host, I'm on the other side of the mic today, which is nice for a change, and I'm going to let you decide where you want to start, and we'll kind of go from there. And
Okay.
I'm cool with talking about anything you want.
Well, I like that. I like that because I am too. But I think most of the people who are listening first want to understand your background and how you got into really more the health activism side of things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, uh, my sort of foray into the health side of things, first of all, was actually through like the spiritual side of things. So, it was a little bit different for me. I didn't have like these crazy health issues and then healed myself, and now I want to help other people. That's not my story at all. So for me, it was really a calling as a young man to help others, and sort of the vehicle presented itself, right? But shortly after I got into all of that, I had always known because of the spiritual side of things and growing up the way I did. I mean, I grew up in apartheid. I watched the rise and fall of apartheid in high school. And so I kind of grew up with this whole idea that, like, you know, something's not right. We inherently didn't really trust the government growing up, still to this day. So I was kind of like born up, raised in that sort of culture. And then once I started traveling around and spent enough time with more of an eclectic kind of crowd, an international crowd, I started learning that, hey, a lot of the stuff that we're being told is just like not actually true. Whether it's being purposely manipulated, whether it's a lie, whatever it is, right? And so I kind of, that's the backstory there. But then in terms of actually getting into the real activist side of things, it was in 2007. I was living and working pretty intensely with the First Nations group just off the Six Nations Reserve, which is outside of Hamilton, Ontario. And so while I was doing that work, I mean, it was a very, very crazy time spiritually for me anyway. And I read Sean Buckley's paper for the NHPPA, and this was at the time was Bill C-51. And this was the first sort of attack on natural health products that I had been sort of confronted with. I know it had happened before in the late 90s and all these sorts of things. But anyway, I was lying in bed and I had this waking vision. I sort of like sat up in bed and I opened my eyes and there was all these people in front of me. And then I closed my eyes and those people were still there. And so that sort of prompted me. I was like, listen, I got to get a whole bunch of people out. Like, we have to protest this. And together with a group of colleagues and friends, that all came together real quick. And we got just over 1,000 people out to Queen's Park in about 4 or 5 days. And so, that sort of thrust me into a whole different sphere, to be honest with you. Like, I didn't know what was going to happen. But suddenly I found myself chairing a coalition at the time called the Canadian Natural Health Coalition, and suddenly got connected with a lot of old school health freedom fighters, supplement companies, lawyers, like, I mean, you name it, and then that's sort of it from there, So I've always been outspoken about that in all of the classes that I've ever taught. Some people sort of raise an eyebrow and they're like, well, why do you rail on the medical establishment so much? Why do you bring politics into health? And it's like, at the end of the day, if you don't realize that politics and health are so intricately connected, like, you have a lot of learning to do, because just take a look at where we're at right now. I mean, the drug companies and the foothold that they have on people, but also on the global economy. This is part of what has got us into the position that we're in today. So yeah, and sort of from there, like, hey, it's been a wild ride. Let's just say that.
Yeah, even though obviously I don't have my finger on the pulse, is that the saying, as much as you do, but
Sure.
I I am one of the things that's one of my expertise is supplements
Hmm.
and therapeutic usage of supplements. And so it's impossible for me to not notice that these supplements that I've always recommended are being bought by massive
Hmm.
companies that do not promote wellness, Brett. And it
Yeah.
kind of freaks me out because
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, well, but then I'm being told that, oh, don't worry, they're still the same supplements. I'm thinking, how? How is that? How is a company that promotes really unhealthy food going to keep the same standard of supplements that were individually owned by small companies?
Yeah. Well, take a look at what happened with all of the mom and pop organic food companies, right? I mean, it's the same thing. This has been going on for decades now at this point. And so I think that, if you just take a look at what's happening nowadays, I think as someone who's been in the wellness space for as long as I have, right, I can tell you that there's been an astronomical change. Like, it's like night and day from when I started. My first graduating class was 14 people, and now there's graduates being pumped out hundreds, right? And what that shows me is that what's been going on over the last few years is really a paradigm shift in the healthcare field, right? And just call it health, right? Forget about health and wellness or allopathic medicine or whatever. Just generally speaking, the reason why what we do has become so popular is because people have started to realize that, hang on a second, like, I keep going back to the doctor and they just keep prescribing me pills. They don't sit down and actually want to understand what's going on with me. I go bounce around from specialist to specialist. They don't talk to one another. We're starting to see that people are waking up to the idea of compartmentalized medicine. So the rheumatologist is laser focused on rheumatology. The immunologist is focused on that. The endocrinologist, and so on and so forth. And so when you compartmentalize healthcare like that, what you have is you have a very reductionist left brain kind of mechanistic type of system. And people are realizing that for the ailments and diseases that people are suffering from nowadays, that model is not really working for them. And so, I don't know about you, but I'll just say from my own experience, I dealt with in my practice at a very high level. I mean, I help people with very chronic, very complex conditions. They were often abandoned by the medical system. They could get no results whatsoever through the allopathic system. And finally, when they came to me, now because we're working from a more holistic perspective, we're starting to see how everything is connected. Suddenly, when you go down that road, running lab tests not to diagnose disease, but to assess metabolic function and then restore and correct that function, this is why functional medicine has become so popular. And in the US now, I would actually argue that is becoming very quickly more of the default sort of front end system of care. I don't want to sort of say that from a holistic perspective, but certainly, if people can choose their providers, a lot of people in the US are looking for doctors who are functional medicine doctors now. So I think all that to say, like, that's where we're at right now, and that doesn't come without consequences. And the consequences are that the drug companies know, right? The medical system knows that there's more, they're losing customers. Let's just put it that way in plain English. And as they lose customers, they want to hold on to that monopoly that they have. So there's only two ways you do that. You outmarket people with a massive budget, and you promote the heck out of your products, and or you buy up the competition and you
And
monopolize everything.
you know how they
You know?
always say, whenever somebody is a threat, you try and push them down, right?
Yeah.
So then you start to alter the narratives. Like, you're
Hmm.
not allowed to say that this can diagnose, cure, or heal disease. You're not allowed to say this. You will get fined this. There are many ways that natural health is really being pushed down.
Oh, yeah.
And Brett, to your point, when I was working with clients, I'll never forget this one situation. The client was a vegetarian, and when this client went to her doctor, she was extremely malnutritioned. She
Hmm.
wasn't, as you know, if you eat a vegetarian diet, you have to be very careful to ensure that you're getting all the nutrients you need. After many, many years, that can present in different issues. So this client was going through other issues, other problems. She was given an antidepressant because she told her doctor that she was ready to just kind of drive through a red light. Like, this is
Wow.
how,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay. So, of course, she did that, but then she's like, okay, well, maybe I need to work on my nutrition. Maybe I need to figure that out.
Yeah.
So, when I worked with her, and of course, I'm not making any medical claims here. She did whatever she did with her doctor. I don't care. I had no part of that. But then I was like, okay, well, let's assess what's really going on here. And then when we assessed it, it's like, oh my God, like, you are so low in just these vital nutrients. She started taking methylated B complex. She started taking a little bit more B12. She started to
Hmm.
take high quality nutraceuticals. And then she herself was like, I don't need these antidepressants. And she now knows how to really support her wellness as a vegetarian. But that's to your point. I think more and more people are saying, hey, if I look to food as medicine, and if I take the right nutraceuticals to support my lifestyle, my stage in life, maybe my genetics, then I can really age better. So I know that's an extreme case, but there are many. And I get a lot of
Well,
these messages
yeah.
from people who are like, oh my God, I did this. And then it empowers them too, which I think is amazing, Brett.
Well, I think that's just it, right? So, the Latin origins for doctor is teacher, you know what I mean? So the teacher must teach the person. Like, what we have now is we have a system where people are fully dependent on their provider who's not really offering much at all. I've softened up a lot over the years. Like, I used to be very, very hardcore about, like, no drugs, no anything, like just 100% holistic. And I've kind of, like, smartened up a little bit as I've gotten older, because, working with very, very sick people, sometimes you need drugs. If you get hit by a bus, don't come and see me. If you break a leg, don't come and see me. So I think that what we've sort of lost, if you will, is that Western medicine was born out of infectious disease. That's where it came from, was people were dying of infections, people were dying of broken limbs, people were dying in labor, stuff like that. And so um, that's where Western medicine shines, in fact, like even in more acute emergency type of situations, Western medicine is fantastic, so we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But now what we have is we have a population that has been weakened, that has been made sick by the food that they eat, that has been poisoned with a variety of different toxins. We're living high stress lives. We are being exposed to too much artificial light, screens, the list goes on and on and on, right? And so Western medicine, unfortunately, is not equipped to properly deal with that, because if you understand from a basic level, what drugs do is drugs suppress and they cut off metabolic pathways, right? That's really it. So it's like the analogy I've used for years in my classes is, can you imagine if I'm driving down the road and the gas light comes on, right? Well, I have a few different options. I can, call a friend and be like, hey, I'm stuck on the highway. Can you come and help me? I can, hopefully, if I have a jerry can of gas in the back, I can maybe top myself up and off I go. I can maybe go, well, the light's on and it's maybe 30 clicks to the next gas station. I'm going to wing it and hopefully I make it. But there's another option. You can cut the light. Okay, so if I cut the light, what that does is it tells me, it creates the illusion that I have gas in the tank. Meanwhile, I'm running out. And that's what drugs do, right? Drugs create the illusion of health because in the Western model, if you do not have symptoms, you are deemed to be healthy. And so, you can suppress and mask symptoms all day long and create the illusion of health, but in reality, you're still breaking down and you're still degrading, and there you go. And so this is where Western medicine really falls short. And this is where, on the contrary, this is where the kind of work that we do and have done really shines. Like Bernard Jensen, I mean, almost 100 years ago, the one of the most pioneering nutritionists, 350,000 patients in his day, wrote 70 books. And he coined the phrase, he said it best. He said, every single disease can be traced back to some type of nutrient deficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like Bernie was a smart guy. So I tend to take that with, some seriousness.
Oh, well, obviously I align with that. I think you can trace it back to a nutrient deficiency, and then you can look at, well, what's the causative factor? Is it lifestyle? Is it
Yeah,
genetics? Is it
yeah,
right? Because
exactly.
yeah,
And
yeah.
take a look, the life that we're living right now in a modern sense is very distorted from the way that people have lived prior to that. Like prior to 100 years ago, even 100 years ago for that matter, people were living a lot more naturally by default. You know what I mean? Like through this process of industrialization, food preservation, all these types of things. And I'm not saying they're all bad necessarily. We've had to figure things out as we've gone along. But I think that we are living very artificially these days and quite removed from nature. And it's starting to show in the health of people. Sure, like we might have extended life expectancy, but I would argue, what is the quality of that life in the second half of your life? I mean, how many people have multiple diagnosed diseases on multiple prescription medications and so on and so forth? We have an obesity problem. The list goes on and on, so
We could,
I don't,
yeah.
yeah, you get it.
I get it. I get it
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I have been on my grandparents' farm. I they lived off the land. I mean,
yeah.
they did,
Everyone did.
and I've had these conversations, Brett, even with hormone doctors, because a lot of people will say, "Well, why didn't my grandparents need bioidentical hormones?" Well, probably because there weren't so many endocrine disruptors in the world. There weren't so many. They
Hmm.
were eating off the land. They were living according to their circadian rhythms, which is really important for healthy hormones. So my
Yeah.
grandmother was 82. She died because of an accident, not because of dementia, not because of
Hmm.
arthritis, not because of an autoimmune disease, not because of cancer, not because of anything. So,
Yeah.
we can't really go backwards. And there are some things that have been really incredible and advances, but
Totally.
how can we create a balanced life and almost get the best of both worlds.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what a lot of people are trying to do, right? So, I mean, like it's not like I'm living in, spear and loincloth out in the woods either,
Yeah.
So none of us are immune in that sense. And I think that there is a happy medium. I think we do the best with what we can. And that's partly why, well, this space that we're in has become so popular. Um, yeah, so I think I'm going to leave it there because there's a lot we could carry on with about that. Suffice to say that I think that in other instances as well, people have also like the whole biohacker movement and what have you. There's some of the stuff there that's just so like off the rails. It's so extreme that there is this other side to the health and wellness space where I think people are terrified of aging, and I think people don't want to get old. And I think part of that is pushed on us through social media, through Hollywood, through these types of things. So, anyway, I'll leave that there because that's maybe a podcast in and of itself.
Yeah, yeah. The whole point is that we need to kind of marry all facets of wellness in order to be well in this modern day life. And
Yeah,
when one
yeah,
of these very crucial, important aspects, not one, multiple, because I think there's many subcategories of natural health products, when that's being pushed out, we had a problem.
yeah, yeah.
So
I
why
mean,
don't
so like here's the thing, right? So we're at this point now where the government keeps crying about like the healthcare system's broke and we've got these crazy wait times. Right now, like in Canada, what was that number? I just read it I think there's like 5.4 million Canadians without a family doctor right now. Like out of a country of 40 million people, like that's a pretty high percentage, right? Wait times, difficulty getting tests. All right. So if you want to go get a test from your doctor now, it's really, really difficult. So, all of this tax money that's going into the healthcare system, and then what they're doing is they're tightening the belt, they're trimming the fat, they're doing all these types of things to try and squeeze the profit out of that with, and then deliver like subpar service. And so, the irony of all of that is the one thing that so many Canadians are doing to keep themselves out of the medical system, to keep themselves out of the hospital, is actually to rely on natural health products, on good food, and maybe their practitioner, whatever that is, whether it's a nutritionist, a homeopath, or whatever, And here we have the government now trying to tell us, that these things are, need to be validated for more safety, and we need more regulations and blah, blah, blah. So it's like, at the one side of their mouth, it's like the system's broken, it's bankrupt, we need to do everything we can. And on the other side, well, this one thing that people are doing, we're just going to make it even more difficult for you to do that now. So it's, and I'll leave people to sort of wonder why that might be, because it's quite conflicting if you look at it that way.
So, for anybody who's listening to this, I have recorded with Brett and the NHPPA, and you can go back and listen to more specifics on Canada and these bills that have been put into place very kind of sneakily, I'm going to add,
Hmm.
that a
Hmm.
lot of Canadians didn't even know that it was happening when Canada has a really, really safe nutraceutical supplement profile anyway, as it is.
Yeah.
So you can go back and listen to those if you want to hear more, because Brett's really going to expand on this topic, because I think that maybe the pandemic stirred up a lot of this, because since then we've seen a lot of things change. Do you want to start
Yeah.
there? I know your work went back much further, but the
Yeah.
pandemic was an interesting time, Brett, and we need to
Yeah.
touch on
Well,
it.
yeah. I mean, look, I think the world has changed forever. There's no going back to pre-pandemic life and whatnot. That's all changed. It's changed. Some things have changed like night and day, like they're unrecognizable. Other things are changing, and we're moving into a different time altogether now. So I think, there were a lot of things leading up to the pandemic that in hindsight now, when we look back, you go, oh my gosh, now I can see the on-ramp a little bit better. But for anyone who maybe wasn't paying attention, it's like, oh my gosh, they just foisted this stuff upon us, right? And so I think with natural health products particularly, there's actually a very, very long on-ramp. And what the pandemic really did was it gave I'll say the health authorities, for lack of a better word, because this is a global picture, but we'll kind of keep our sights pointed on Canada right now, is if you notice what happened in the pandemic, right? There was no talk at any point, even to this day, of anything else that you could do to support yourself during that time. So it's like, hang on, everyone, we got this big scary thing that's going on. We've never seen it before. Holy smokes, everyone, we're just trying to figure this out on the fly. But you can't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't do that, and you can't do that. And I've done podcasts with. I did a great podcast with Rodney Palmer, who's an award-winning journalist. He worked with CBC, he worked with Global. He was an international correspondent stationed throughout the Middle East and Europe. And when you speak to people like that, and you say, "Hey, tell me, like, the media side of things that we witnessed during the pandemic, like what's going on there?" And he'll tell you straight up that is unprecedented. Like, how did we suddenly have the story where we're trying to feel our way in the dark, but suddenly we've just got this unified message that's just being pumped out 24/7 on every single channel you can think of, that this is the only way out. And don't listen to people talking about vitamin D or zinc or quercetin or anything else. Now people are quite familiar with the ivermectin story. I did a story back in the day on hydroxychloroquine with Dr. James Lyons Weiler. So we, like, I've been at the tip of the spear with a lot of this stuff, and I could see right away. I was like, there's a smear campaign. With hydroxychloroquine, there was a Lancet study with 96,000 people in a study. And it turns out that there was no people at all at the end of it all. It was completely fabricated to show that hydroxychloroquine increased your death, your chances of dying by 38%. So it's like, when they retract it, you don't hear anything, right? So anyway, my point in saying all of this is that what happened at that time was it set up the framework now where, hey, listen, everyone, there's a whole bunch of misinformation out there. Okay, you got these crazy people talking about vitamin D, you got these crazy people talking about zinc and all this other stuff. And we, the benevolent leaders, we, the scientists, the doctors, we are the ones that actually have the answer. And anything else outside of that now is incorrect.
Yep.
Despite the fact that we have an enormous amount of data on some of the things that I've touched on. Vitamin D, even at that time, I haven't even gone back and looked at it. There were 75 peer-reviewed studies within the first year. You know what I mean? You've got doctors, like some of those frontline doctors who I happen to know some of them now. You can imagine if you're a doctor in an ER situation, you've got this thing that you've never seen before, but you have 30 or 40 years of experience. You're going to use your best judgment and your experience to feel your way in the dark and to figure things out. And they did. And what happened? Because they didn't stay in line with the official story, they got reprimanded and or lost their license or what have you. So, all that to say that I think that what the pandemic did was set this sort of stage for, hey, we need to control things now. And this is why we're seeing so much censorship on not just the health side of things, but on all topics, right? And so the truth now is a heavily contested subject, right? People really want to know the truth. They want to know what's going on. And that is being actively suppressed nowadays, still to this day, it's just absolutely frightening to this day with the work that we do. All right. We'll just keep it on health for the minute. To this day, I have yet to see a mainstream media article, a newspaper publication, a magazine publication on how you can support your immune system and your health to protect yourself from supposed pathogens and infections and whatnot. There's not one, So it's kind of crazy if you think about it. The only way out of this is a pharmaceutical option.
Yeah.
Many of which are untested, So this is, anyway. I'll stop there, and then you tell me where you want to go from there.
Well, I think you set the stage for the
Yeah,
conversation where we can go
yeah,
because
yeah.
the fact is that there were so many terms that were created out of the pandemic. And when I say terms, you're a conspiracy theorist.
Hmm.
You are spreading falsehoods. And by the way, I am still getting censored on
Yeah,
like YouTube. I
yeah,
get notes from them saying the WHO
yeah,
doesn't support what your recording is about. And then all of a sudden, I've got no views, Brett.
yeah,
And so then
yeah.
I'm like, okay, well, I and I'm not telling anybody what to do. I'm simply saying, here's something. And nobody's saying that we are curing or healing or doing anything crazy. And even if we
Yeah.
were, even if somebody did make that claim and they said, I actually have patients who have benefited from this, I actually have a recording with somebody who has documented patients and they are a doctor, but they are not speaking the narrative.
Right. Yeah. Well, so this is the problem. The problem is so first of all, the YouTube thing is only going to get worse, by the way. It's not getting any better because that's all changed very recently as well. So but here's the thing, okay? So how are we supposed to trust the experts if
Who
the
is the
experts aren't
who? That's the
right?
question.
Well,
Who is the who?
right. So let's think of this another way, right? And then I'm going to come back to this.
Okay.
If we're dropped into the situation where we have this big scary monster and oh my gosh, no one knows what to do. We've never seen this before. This is unprecedented. You would think that if I was a leader, okay, and I really had the best interest of the people that I was serving as the leader, I would be throwing the kitchen sink at it.
Yeah.
I'd be, guys, let's just figure this out. Anything? Okay, so apparently if you stand on your head and you look at the sun at midday, like that's going to help. Cool, let's do it, everyone. Tell everyone to do it, right? It wouldn't really matter what the thing is so long as it worked to help people, to save lives, to protect people. But that is not what happened, and it's still not happening. So then you have to wonder to yourself, why is this such a push for narrative control? Okay, why is there such a push to control the truth or to control what is perceived to be the truth? And once you follow the money and you follow the control up, that's where you start getting your answers. Because make no mistake, there's no solution that's not provided by a drug company. There's no
100%.
solution. So, and as I opened this podcast up, I mean, the drug companies are a cornerstone of the global economy, just like the automobile industry. So they're not going anywhere. And I don't want to get into, I don't even need to get into any of the more nefarious reasons. Suffice to say that this is about money, it's about power, it's about control, is really what it's about. Okay, it's not about having your best interests at heart and protecting you. Um, it's becoming pretty obvious at this point.
And I
So
think more and more people see it. Like it's
exactly.
obvious to way more people now than back then. But I do believe that when you really instill fear in people, because I've been there on the other side of a diagnosis, and when you're scared,
Hmm.
a lot of times when you work so hard to create that fear, people will just believe anything. If you say, I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to make sure you're okay, and you're
Yeah.
scared shitless,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
And
look, so this let's just open things up a little bit more in the conversation, right? We're living in a time now where we are under what is called fifth generation warfare. Okay. Now, fifth generation warfare, that I don't want to get all military on people, given this is a health podcast, but you should know what it is, because if you don't know what it is, you're probably being quite heavily influenced by it, and we all are, right? And you know, fifth generation warfare involves a lot of psychological manipulation. There's a lot of um, information bombardment, right? So if you just look at the environment that we're in right now, what we're being presented with is constantly, right? It's constantly two opposing views, and that's what we drop into public discourse every single time. It doesn't matter what the issue is, it must always be these people versus these people over here. Okay. And then what you do is you overlay that with a ton of information, both misinformation, disinformation, accurate information, whatever. And eventually, what you do if you keep on bombarding people like that is people get confused, right? The one of the most common things that I'm hearing from people nowadays is they don't know what to believe. Okay,
Yes.
they don't know what to believe. So if you don't know what to believe, then guess what happens? You don't know what's true and you don't know what's not true. And if you keep on following that line long enough, what you need to do is you need to have someone tell you what the truth is because you can't figure it out for yourself. And I get it, right? I feel sorry for people that were dropped into all of this in the pandemic because I have a 25-year on-ramp. I could see things pretty well right out the gate, what was happening. And that's why I started speaking about it early. But I have a lot of sympathy for people where your core beliefs, your worldview, all of these things are being shattered and broken right now. And you're having to try and figure this out in the dark while we're in this super polarized environment, right? It's crazy. But when you understand this properly, what you also need to understand is you need to understand that there's been a multi-generational on-ramp to all of this. And what we've witnessed in the West is we've witnessed a process of ideological subversion. And what that means is that we slowly invert reality. Okay, we slowly invert it. We slowly start telling you, hey, hang on a second. You guys all used to think that this color red was red. Well, it's kind of pink now. That red that you thought, yeah, that's pink. So all the kids now, we're going to tell them that color is actually pink. Okay. Eventually, what's going to happen is the next generation, it's not actually pink anymore. That color is actually starting to turn a little bit blue, right? And then you keep on going. And so if you look at the education system, right, and Canada is a prime example of this, is when you look at the education system, I have 3 children, I have one that's a little bit older, 2 that are really young, is this constant discussion around safety. Okay, safety, 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 safety. Don't cross the road, be safe, be safe. I've never seen safety like this. I've traveled all over the world. I've never seen safety like this like I've seen it in Canada, right? Here's what happens when you constantly talk about safety. What you're actually doing is you're telling people that the world is not safe. And what you're also doing is you're saying in order to keep you safe, you need an authority figure to keep you safe. Now, when you follow that line back 3 generations, 4 generations, and you watch what happens, now you drop those people into this environment, and guess what happens? I'm afraid. The world is a scary place. I don't know fact from fiction, and I'm in this polarized, combative type of environment. Who's coming to save the day? It must be an authority figure because that's what's actually been put in your mind for multiple generations. And what that does is it tees up this whole situation where people have lost their ability to think critically. Is really what it is. And that's a very dangerous position for us all to be in, because as soon as you stick your head up above the parapet and you're the person that decides to go the other direction, you're going to have a whole bunch of people that go, whoa, hang on a second. The authorities actually say something different to what you're saying. So you're going against the herd.
Mm-hmm.
No good, And so it's not just the authorities and the police or the whoever that we have to be concerned with here. We also have to consider that there's the mob mentality, that there's a population that will also come after you, so to speak.
Yep.
Dare you speak out? And we saw that. I mean, that's what we saw in the last 4 years. I bore the brunt of that being on the front of it. I lost so many friends. I had my business website hacked twice. I had to come over the border and basically defy all orders. Like it was traumatic. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. But that's what it takes in this time. But hopefully, anyway. I mean, I'm going to shut up right there. But I just hope that kind of gives people maybe a bit of a deeper sense of what's going on behind the more obvious things that we're seeing out there.
And I will say, I'm going to add to that. I actually have had so many conversations with people who said exactly what you said as it related to the pandemic, and their way of thinking was not with the rest of the society, and that they were shunned. They were cast out because of it. So,
Yeah.
there's a lot of that. These critical thinkers who still decided that whatever was being told to them, they weren't going to buy it. So I have to go back to who is the who?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people, they just see CDC says this, World Health Organization says this, so it must be true. So who are these people?
Right. Well, so as you know, I've done a lot of work with on this topic. I've been working and really keeping my ear to the ground with things like the international health regulations, the pandemic treaty. I was in Geneva in June of this year
Hmm.
with some, wonderful people, very influential people, very interesting people. And so, when you spend enough time with these folks, you start to get a real good sense of the things that other people might not see publicly, right? You get a peek behind the curtain to see what's going on. And so I think the WHO is simply, right, the World Health Organization is simply a meeting place. That's what it is, right? It's a meeting place. And so this is why they are somewhat immune to the laws of the world, because they're just a meeting place, right? They're not a country. They're not an elected body, right? No one voted, like no one votes who's in the who, right? So what it is really a group of individuals. Some of them, I mean, they all come from member states, right? So a member state would say, hey, this is our person that we're sending over to the WHO. They're going to be our representative. But the public themselves don't vote on who that representative is going to be. Okay. So the government in each nation basically says, these are our representatives or a representative or what have you. And then off they go and they go to this meeting place. But there's another part to this, and it's a very important part, is it's not just the representatives of those countries all sitting together going, hey, everyone, from a global perspective, what's the best way to combat heart disease? And what's the best way to fight the next pandemic or whatever, right? That's not what they do. There's the other part of it, which is a better question to ask, which is who is funding the WHO?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's a very, very important question. Now, you will find that all of the member states themselves put in money. Okay, the US is the second or the first or second biggest donor, I forget at this moment in time, but they're one of the big donors, okay, is the US. The other big donor is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yep.
Okay, that's no secret. There's nothing
Yeah.
conspiratorial about that. He's
Nope.
pretty open about that, right? And so what you have is alongside that, you have other organizations like that, which are typically called NGOs, right? So non-governmental organizations. These are often portrayed as quite philanthropic. So, we're here to just give away our billions of dollars and we're going to help the WHO to save the people and protect everyone. But then what you find out is you also have behind them is you will often find that there are drug companies, there are vaccine manufacturers, the manufacturers of all of the PPE, so your protective wear, testing devices, et cetera, right? And so what starts to emerge once you understand all of that is you can imagine you've got these NGO organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? This is a very, very good example here. And what they're doing on the one hand is they're saying, hey, we're going to give this money to the WHO and support you all to have these discussions, right? On the other hand, what we have is we're also going to be funding the companies that will be in charge of producing what are called medical countermeasures. So we're going to be studying pathogens. We're going to be studying these infections and viruses and what have you. We're also going to be manufacturing vaccinations to combat those viruses and pathogens. We're also going to be developing drugs. We're going to be selling PPE, testing, et cetera, et cetera. So what you have is you have the WHO, who's now beholden to, in some ways anyway, is beholden to these NGOs. And the NGOs are now also beholden to the to the drug companies. I'm saying that in air quotes, right? And so to put this in plain English is what you now have is you've incentivized in many respects, and I can expand on this in a minute, is you have a situation where, hey, we can declare public health emergencies, okay, at whim. I mean, just look at what's happening with Mpox right now in the Congo.
Hmm.
Have a look at what's happening with bird flu. Okay, I don't want to be Debbie Downer here, but I'm about to blow the lid on what's going on with bird flu on my own podcast this week. Because what's happening there is they're stockpiling bird flu vaccines. Why are they doing that, right? They must know something. They're not just stockpiling them because, and we just had a bird flu summit. I mean, can you imagine? You have a summit, right? A 3-day summit on bird flu. Like summits don't just happen overnight. I mean, that's 6 to 12 months of planning to get all those people there. So the point is this, is that when you look at the criteria in order to be able to declare what's called a FEIC, a PHEIC, or a public health emergency of international concern, there's no real threshold. There's no real criteria. It's not like we're saying, okay, we need 5% of the population to be infected or anything like that. There's no threshold whatsoever. So you can basically say, hey, if we go out and we start testing now, this is very important. If we go out into the world and we just start testing and we find something, we can declare an emergency. If we declare an emergency, now what happens is all of the WHO policies, which all of the member states have agreed to, they all kick into gear. And everyone turns to the WHO and says, hey, WHO, what should we do? Because we just discovered this infectious agent or what have you. And the WHO says, oh, you should do all of these things, right? Here's the vaccinations that you need. Here's the PPE. Here's the testing that you need. And who profits from that? The NGOs and the companies in the background. They take those profits and what do? They turn some of it back over and they say, here you go, WHO, here's your funding. So what you actually have is you have a giant racket where they can declare public health emergencies. You know, I've said this on my own show. We are entering the age of pandemics right now. You know, how is it that you can have this once in a lifetime pandemic and now suddenly we're going to see more of them? They're once in a lifetime, but now they're all being teed up, you know? I just have a couple things to say and then I'm going to keep quiet. People need to realize this, the apparatus and the system here. And part of what's happened over the last 6 months is with the amendments to the international health regulations that were passed, what they're now doing is they're actually setting up these biolabs around the world. And what those labs do is those labs go out into the environment and elsewhere to go and find pathogens. This is happening in Canada too. They're testing asymptomatic cows for bird flu. They're testing wastewater. They're testing milk.
Yeah.
They want to test everything under the sun for bird flu. So, there's leaked video footage of public health openly speaking about this. And then we want to go and test people. This is irrespective of if you are sick or if anyone has died. The mere presence of this says that we can now kick into gear all of these WHO policies and recommendations. And there you go. There's your next pandemic.
I was just going to ask you about the testing. So that just happened. I remember during the pandemic, that was the first time, because this isn't my expertise.
Totally. Yeah, I get it.
I didn't know this, but I had no idea that they were testing public wastewater to see how much of the virus is active. So what you're saying is they'll do that, and that's just, it doesn't matter whether people are sick or not. They'll just
It doesn't matter. No, it doesn't matter.
That's insane.
So it's very crazy, that people need to really start like sinking into this and understanding what's happening. So there's an initiative called the One Health Initiative. Okay, this is the World Health Organization's One Health Initiative. And when you read between the lines, what is One Health? It sounds very, very altruistic on its face. We need to make sure that health is not just, the health of people. It's not just the health of you, Sandy.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that all the animals and the plants and the ecosystem and the air and the water and everything, we need to make sure that everything is healthy, right? Correct, 100% believe that. But here's the thing they don't tell you, or the thing that people gloss over, is how are you going to ensure that? Who? How are you going to ensure that? Oh, we're going to monitor and track and surveil every single thing. That is where the wastewater comes in. That's where all of these things come in, right? And so you can imagine as you go out there and test, with bogus tests, I might add. We can talk about that as well. That where tests where you're more likely to find something. If you stand to profit from these emergencies, then it is in your best interest to go out and find emergencies, right? And that's kind of where we're headed, you know. So, there's been a Marburg virus outbreak in Rwanda. There's Mpox happening in the Congo and through Africa, which has been declared an emergency by the WHO, by the way. And now we've got this bird flu situation, which is kind of, most people have kind of tuned out of the bird flu. They're like, man, whatever, I'm just not going to comply. And it's like, okay, let's just see what happens. We've got an election happening right now, and everyone is super distracted by that, which is fair enough. I get it. It's an important election. But there's things that are going on in the background that most people are oblivious to. And that's just one of them, you know?
So here's the ironic thing, like during the pandemic, it was all about gaslighting every other possible solution, unless you were a medical doctor, medical professional. And yet many of the people that are a part of WHO are not even medical. Like Bill Gates
Yeah,
is not a doctor,
no, not at all. No.
yet he holds
Um,
so much power.
Yep, exactly. And I mean, look, he's on the record, like vaccines are a good investment. It's 20 to 1 return. So it's like this is not, I would be less what's the word? I might feel better about this if there was no profit motive.
Mm.
Right? If there was no profit motive, I could say, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, you guys are just, pulling it out the bag. You're donating all of your money to really help us, blah, blah, blah. But as soon as there's a profit motive, as soon as there's money to be made off of emergencies, this is a whole different ballgame, right? And we can see that across the board right now, is you can see with mass destabilization and chaos and all of these big scary narratives, the people that are coming in to supposedly save the day, one, they profit from it, and two, in many cases, they're actually creating the problems that they're trying to solve.
And then controlling.
Exactly. And then control the narrative so that, in case the cat gets out the bag, we can't have that, right? That's unfortunately where we're at right now. And it's not, I don't want to say it's getting better, although I will say that more people are waking up to what's going on. That's why we're having this conversation.
Yeah. And I mean, we briefly touched on this back when there was that whole convoy, the truckers' convoy. I mean, there's a lot of talk still about wages being garnished and all kinds of things when, I don't know, like who's controlling the narrative there?
Yeah.
From what I understood, it was peaceful, but then you hear a totally different narrative, and it's like, who do I believe? And why are these people's wages garnished?
Yeah. Well, I think let's not talk about that specifically. I think let's bring something else into the picture here.
Okay.
And something that I've been talking about pretty relentlessly over the last while. I don't want to say I broke the story. I kind of did. I definitely lit a fire across Canada with the podcast that I did with a lawyer by the name of Lisa Myron. And Lisa, I got introduced to her through a mutual contact, and they were like, you should get her on your show and talk to her. And I was like, cool. So I contacted her. And about 6 months ago, I think it was actually, it was right before I went to Geneva. I think it was like in May or something like that. I just kind of came across this, and then I posted it, and people got all upset, and not in a bad way. They were just like, what the hell? And then I kind of let it go, and I never came back to it. But there's a bill in Canada right now called Bill C-293. And Bill C-293, I really encourage people, if there's anything you take away from this podcast, please go and look up Bill C-293. And if you can just plug that particular episode in here, Sandy, into your show notes I would appreciate that. Because people need to understand, in the context of everything we've discussed right now, you need to understand what's going on on a Canadian level here. So what Bill C-293 is Canada's Pandemic Prevention and Preparedness Act. Okay. This has been expedited, so it's actually now currently an active second reading in the Senate.
Mm.
So I'm going to just say that again for people so that you got that. This is in second reading in the Senate, not in the House. It's already gone through the House. It's already moved all the way through. So there's basically two more readings. There's second and third, and then it's royal assent. And they revived that last week. So they started talking about it again. They had a 20-minute session about it. But what they're doing nowadays is they're actually sometimes doing second and third reading in one day and then just passing these things, right?
Mm.
So when you start looking at the this bill, what you start to see is you start to see that this is, in many instances, this is the WHO's One Health initiative coming into Canada as law.
Mm.
Okay, and I'm saying this in a very, I just want to skim the surface because we don't need to get into the weeds here. Go and listen to the podcast and you'll understand. We go through the bill line by line and you can understand it in more detail. So what's interesting is for the longest time, when I started looking at the WHO and even when I was in Geneva, I was speaking to people and I said, how are they going to bring this into the member states? Like we, do we have national sovereignty? I mean, that's a big topic of discussion. Like, do we have the power to self-govern? And everyone says, yes, 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 we do. And it's like, okay. So in other words, if the WHO says these are the recommendations and you have to lock down and you have to do this or that, do our governments have to do that? Is it legally binding? And it turns out it's not. However, with C293, what I discovered is that our regulatory agencies, right? Health Canada, Public Health Agency of Canada, they have been tethered to something called the Pan American Health Organization. Okay. Did you know that the Pan American Health Organization existed? Have you heard of that before? Have you heard of PAO? No, most people haven't. I didn't know until I looked into it, which was quite recently. So I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. So hang on. What is PAHO? What is the public, what is this Pan American Health Organization? Well, guess what? It's the regional branch of the WHO. So as a regional branch of the WHO, our regulatory agencies have been taking their cues from PAHO. So now what happens is as C293 comes into law, which is our Pandemic Prevention and Preparedness Act, I sometimes get those the words mixed around, is there are things in there that should just like really, you should just stop and pause for a moment. Things like land. Why are they talking so much about the land? Why are they talking so much about agriculture? Why are they talking so much about the food supply? Right? So outside of just your obvious, hey, everyone's, we've got this thing floating around the community and we need to do our best in terms of vaccines and PPE and whatever. Now suddenly it's like, oh, hang on, we can acquire land, we can expropriate land, we can, the animals are now a threat. So when you start reading between the lines on that bill, there's a sort of narrative that's driving all of this, which is climate change is the biggest driver of pandemics. Okay. Yeah. So the Harvard T. Chan School of Medicine has basically said, and they're taking their cues from elsewhere as well, right? So you can see this conversation coming out now, right? Climate-related health issues, right? Climate-related health. They're actually funding now 10,000 doctors in Europe to study climate-related health, new doctors, right? Anyway, we won't talk about that. Suffice to say that there's this story now that's emerging, like, oh my gosh, climate change is the biggest driver of pandemics, right? Because the weather changes and all these things. So what that means is that anything that is a risk to climate change is vis-a-vis a risk to pandemics. What are some of the biggest drivers of climate change, according to what we're told? Deforestation. What is the biggest cause of deforestation? Food and agriculture, particularly animal agriculture, right?
Wow.
And so, so when you start really unpacking it all, it's very crazy. It's an all-encompassing bill that lawyers and people that I've spoken to that understand that are like, it is goodbye to national sovereignty in Canada if that becomes law. So we're in some very some very treacherous territory right now.
So, can I ask you, can I just go back to the whole One Health part?
Yeah,
I just
totally.
want to make sure that I clarify this. The way that I remember hearing about this, I don't know, almost 2 years ago, something
Hmm.
like that. Is it true, and you can clarify, that One Health basically means that we treat the animals a certain way, we treat the environment a certain way, and even as humans, if we are sick, we are unwell, there's a specific treatment for humans, which would be the pharmaceutical side, and it really kind of closes down that whole bio-individuality of treating people as individuals when they need help with their health. Does that make sense?
Well, I think the pharmaceutical model doesn't really deal with
No,
individuality
they
at
don't.
all.
No.
You know, it's treating the disease versus the person, right? So it's like if we have disease X, then we need remedy Y, and that's
Right.
it. You know,
Yeah.
yeah. So that side of things, I mean, I don't even think you need One Health for that. I mean, just take a look at the medical system, right? It's like this is the disease, this is the treatment, and there you go. You know, that's it, and that's what the book says. I think some doctors might be a little bit more, they might think a little bit more holistically, but it's not standard practice. Let's put it that way. Um, but I think, you know, just coming back to this idea of everything should be taken care of, everything should be healthy, blah, blah, blah. Like that's not incorrect. I think the question that we need to ask is what is involved with that? What does that actually mean in reality? Like it's a nice idea, 100%. I think no one would argue with that, right? But what is required to do that,
Mm.
right? Because here's the thing: if I said, take a look at what's happening around Canada, right? They're starting to bring these things in called wildlands. Okay, so they want to protect the environment by declaring things wildlands, right? Even where I live, they've I don't know if they're going to do it, but there's been talks of making a small provincial park. Like I live in a town, it's 20,000 people. That provincial park comes up just by my backyard. Like, so we're not talking about like there's the wild over there, there's the forest over there, and then the people live over here. We're talking about that park actually encroaching into where we live. So what I'm getting at is if the governments say we want to ensure that the land is healthy, guess what's going to happen? They need to manage that land. That's really what it's about. They need to manage that land. They need to manage the wild population. Go and have a look at what Chrystia Freeland did with the caribou out west. The same thing. Oh, this is where the caribou live. Guess what? We have to commandeer this land so that the caribou are safe. So I think that this is where we need to be careful. It's like it's all good and well to say, hey, we want a healthy environment and all the animals should be well. 100% agreed. But I think where the line gets crossed is does the government have to now come in and say, okay, everyone, you know, like all the people that are living in this provincial park, you now, oh, you're driving a car. Okay, you need an electric vehicle. You can't drive so much. You can't do this. You can't do that. You can't, you know. And now
Yeah.
suddenly it's like, okay, well, hang on a second. Like I didn't opt into that. You guys just declared a provincial park right on my back door. So this is happening, you know, land use bylaws is a very real thing in Canada. You know, I did a podcast on this about 3 years ago with a community out in Alberta. So when they change the land use bylaws and they start manipulating everything around us, saying that the goal is to keep everyone healthy, what does that do to us in terms of our rights, freedoms, lifestyle, etc.? And that's the slippery slope that I think people like myself are concerned about.
Of course. Of course. And now, there's more reason to question everything ever since the pandemic. That's why it's not, I mean, you're doing a lot of work to really go down those rabbit holes and find out what's really going on.
Yeah.
And you're educating people who want to listen. And then I can't, like, I got to go back to the CDC because how does that relate to the WHO and who? I know the CDC is a government organization, but how are they connected?
Well, so it's interesting, and the lines are a little fuzzy, right? But first of all, the CDC is a for-profit company, so far as I know. I might be wrong on that, but the one thing I do know for certain is that they actually hold patents for vaccinations.
Oh,
So that's nothing conspiratorial about that. You can go look it up. They own patents on vaccinations, so I'll leave you to decide how much of a conflict of interest that is. Okay. But I think there's something else to consider here. The
Mm.
CDC is just one arm, right? I mean, there's the NHS in the UK, there's Health Canada here in Canada, et cetera. And I think when you look at the power that the drug companies have on the global economy, okay, and influence over policy. I mean, if you go to the US and you look at lobbyists, the pharmaceutical lobbyists outnumber all other lobbyists by 2 to 1 at least. Okay, so there's heavy, heavy lobbying going on with the drug companies, right? And so here's something that everyone should know, that the leaked Pfizer contracts for the COVID shots in Canada and in South Africa, I don't know about anywhere else, but I'm going to suspect that these are carbon copies, is when they have the contract, it shows very, very clearly that they did not know. They actually had to sign off on safety and efficacy data to say that there is no safety and efficacy data on these, and they still rolled them out to market. So the question, the thing that concerns me more here is, yes, you have the CDC. Yes, we need a Health Canada. Yes, we need someone to kind of like, control the science or the medicine or whatever you want to call it. My concern is how much of that is being influenced by the drug companies. That is the question. How much of that is being influenced by the drug companies? We've seen what's happened with drugs like Vioxx, for example. Like Vioxx, I mean, it was on the market for another 2 years after they knew that it was hurting and killing people. So why did they keep it on the market? Like, if these were the regulatory bodies, they would have just yanked them right off. So as soon as they see safety signals, they should be removing these things from the market. And what we've now seen, I mean, just take a look, is I hate to say it, but with the COVID shots, I mean, the safety signals are off the charts, and we're still recommending boosters at this late stage of the game.
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's what's happening right now. This time of year, we're in the fall, we're coming into the winter. This is being recommended in Alberta from children 6 months and up. It's the CDC is pushing it for 65 plus now in the US, and so on and so forth. And I would just encourage people, please go and spend some time on my podcast and just go and listen to some of the work I've done. I know we have a short time here to speak about these things, but I've done a lot of very, very deep research, and I've got some very well-credentialed guests on my show to show you how these things are just like not safe, and also how data has been manipulated, all these types of things. So, I'm not just making this stuff up. We have the receipts in many respects.
Well, natural immunity over here for the win right
Yeah.
now, because I just got over it.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's so funny because you might feel like shit for a while. And I was laughing. I said this to, I don't know, it was one of my friends. I'm like, yeah, it felt kind of shitty second time around. But the bright side is that this is great for my immune system now. That's all. I'm speaking personally. These things make me happy because I'm like, okay, well, now I'm good. I'm good. It actually makes my immune system more robust. But I know I'm not speaking for anybody else. I'm speaking for myself personally.
Sure.
So, okay, I have to say one thing that I had heard, and maybe clarify, because you do so much research, and we are over an hour. I had heard that Health Canada was about, I don't know, 40-50% funded by pharmaceutical companies back in about 2015. I know I'm just giving you approximations.
Yeah.
Now it's like 90%. Does that make sense?
Well, so as anything, right? There's the truth is somewhere in the middle, and there's some nuance to that, right? So I've put that in front of people that have worked within the agency, and they've said it's not 100% accurate. Okay, and again, it's difficult to actually tell. So I think what's important to understand is I want to be very cautious to say that I don't think the drug companies are writing checks to Health Canada, and I don't think that's what's going on, right?
Right.
I'm sure there's some glad handing and backdoor stuff. I mean, that's been going on for a long time. Ferraris left in the parking lot if you do as we ask, that kind of stuff. But I don't think on the books, right? What is happening though is you have what are called cost recovery fees. And cost recovery fees, these are exactly what we're seeing now in the natural health products industry. the cost recovery fees that are put on the drug companies to operate. So licensing fees, labeling fees, all these different fees, the cost recovery fees have been going up as far as I know. And that is where a lot of Health Canada's funding is coming from. So, so that's where there's a little bit of nuance to that, okay? And I would argue, though, that there still is a conflict of interest. There still is because what would happen if that 90% disappeared? Like, would Health Canada, I mean, I encourage people to go and look up a guy by the name of Dr. Shiv Chopra. Shiv Chopra wrote a great book called Corrupt to the Core. I got the pleasure of meeting Shiv shortly before his death. And he wrote a book. He was a veteran Health Canada scientist. He was one of their top people. And they said to him, Shiv, take a look at the data on a number of different subjects. What do you recommend? And he said, well, I recommend that we stop vaccinating animals. I recommend this, this, and this. We stop using Roundup. And what did they do? They fired him. So I think that and he wrote a whole book about it. So I think it's important to understand that regardless of the subtleties of, are they funding them, quote unquote, or are they mostly receiving money through cost recovery fees? The point is, if you try and go against them and you try to do something that is not in their best interests, you're probably going to have a bit of a rough time. Okay. Mm-hmm. And this, I think, from a Canadian perspective, this is something that concerns me greatly, is every single time we see the FDA or the CDC sign off something, particularly the FDA, they sign off on something and they go, oh, it's been approved. Literally 2 or 3 days later, boom, Health Canada approves it. And I question whether Health Canada is actually doing their own research, their own studies and their own checks and balances, or if they're simply saying, oh, well, the FDA and the drug company said it was good, so, off we go. And we'll just sign off on that. That's exactly what happened with the COVID shots, by the way. Again, go and read the NCI commissioner's report. It lays it all out in painstaking detail, under oath. So, yeah.
Before I let you go, we have to touch on Geneva, because when you were in Geneva, you can expand on it, but it was more of a worldwide conference.
100%.
So we need to touch on that for sure, on what you learned. What's the takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, I want to leave people with some kind of hope here, okay? Because I know we painted a pretty bleak picture, okay? But being armed with information is really essential, and the right information, and knowing that I don't have it all figured out. I don't have all the answers, right? But knowing that the road that we're going down, what are the solutions and what can we do here, right? And Geneva was really, really great in the sense that we got to compare notes, right? So you get to hang out with people from different parts of the world, and it's like, what's happening where you are? Have certain things worked where you are? And so what sort of transpired in the wake of that is I'm very well connected with different groups of people from Iceland, from the Netherlands, from Australia, with lawyers, with doctors, with scientists. So it's kind of cool to just be in the loop with what's working and what's not working and what's happening in other countries. And when you look at what's going on here in Canada, I know a lot of people are very, very Canadian focused. They're very politically focused right now with Trudeau and whatnot. And I think what people need to appreciate is this stuff is not localized to Canada. It's happening all over the world in different stages of development and different stages of rollout. It's happening everywhere, okay? And I think one of the two big things that I think I want to leave people with is, first of all, know that there's a lot of people that are working to try and help us. Okay, I will put myself in that camp, right? That's what I'm doing, okay? I don't make any money off my podcast. I have no sponsors. I have no affiliate products, nothing at all, right? And I've done that for a reason, and I will continue to do that as long as I can. So there's a lot of good people out there. There's a lot of good people that are working in the background, okay? I'm not a front person. I'm in the background doing a lot of work. The other thing is, and this is a real heavy question to grapple with, is, do we fight the system and try and take the system down? Or do we build a parallel system? There's a lot of talk right now about parallel systems, right? And it's difficult because the parallel system, it's an overwhelming task. And I think that the third point I'll tack on here is that system does not have to be a global system. It doesn't have to be a national system. It doesn't have to be a provincial or state system. It can be a super, super local system. And I think that that is where I'm at right now, is the antidote to globalism is localism. And once we start building our own communities up and we start strengthening those communities, we're in stage 2 of 3 right now, with a food co-op where I am. And so that's not just a food co-op where, hey, we'll go down to the farmer's market and everyone is welcome. That's a food co-op for, if shit really hits the fan and we suddenly need a digital ID to go to the grocery store or what have you, which is not off the cards, we want to be connected with farmers and our community who have decided that we're not opting into that. That there's a line in the sand and we're not going to cross that line, period. And so when you surround yourself with those types of people, now you have a parallel system of like-minded people and you're all on the same page. So the food co-op is one thing. I think a parallel medical system, which I've floated, a healthcare system, is it's a much bigger undertaking. So we haven't really got much traction there, but that's more of a co-op membership-based type of healthcare system, which again runs parallel. So it doesn't replace the system that we have. If you get hit by a bus or whatever, you still go to the hospital. But how about if we had a system in place that encouraged you to be as healthy as possible? Right? That as vital as possible, as 100% as possible. So that way you actually ensured that you didn't really need the current system. Right? So you starve it out in that sense. And, you can kind of keep going from there. There's a guest friend, I don't know what you would call her, Maggie Braun, who's done some fantastic work at the local level. And so, I think we're very much in alignment in the sense that go and speak to your local councils. Okay, we're not going to shout at Justin Trudeau on social media and tag him and he's going to go, okay, everyone, I've had a complete change of mind. It's like, that's not going to happen, right? The way that we do this is we have to say to our local councils and our local town councils, city councils, whatever, we are not going to stand for this. End of conversation. We're not going to stand for it. We're the voters. We're the constituents here. And if you don't want to play ball here, then one, I'm going to go on the town council. Okay, I'm interviewing an Australian councillor who's done some fantastic work where he is. We're actually going to become the council, right? We're going to become the institutions and we're going to take you guys over. That's how we do it. And I think from a local perspective, that is the way to do it because you're not trying to, eat the whole elephant. You're just taking one bite at a time and it's more manageable for people. And Canada, Canada is such a big country. It's huge. Like everyone goes, oh my gosh, I can't believe we only got, 10 or 15,000 people out to a protest. And it's like, dude, there's 40 million people spread out over like one of the biggest land masses in the world. You're not going to get those numbers. It's not like London or Paris or whatever, where everyone is high concentration.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so I think that is why we have to even look at the approach that we take here in Canada as a very decentralized kind of approach. Where we have to work smart. The trucker convoy was a moment. I don't even know how many people were there. It was jam packed, but that is unprecedented in Canadian history. And I think that asking people to do that kind of stuff all the time, it's not practical. So we need to take this to the local level, and I think that's the way that we're going to, hopefully turn some of this around.
I like that. I like how you do your research. You get all of the information, you get as much data as you can, and then there's potential solutions because people find a lot of this information scary and
Totally. I get it. I
daunting.
get it. It is. It's overwhelming. Make no mistake, it's overwhelming. I guess I'm a different kind of person where I have the ability, this is what's made me a good teacher. I can take very complex topics, I can digest a lot of information, and I can explain it to people in a way that they understand. That's what a lot of my students have said over the years of teaching. And I feel like even with this, because I have such a long on-ramp, I haven't been looking at this for 4 years. I've been looking at it for 25 years. And so a lot of the things that I draw on now, it's like, oh my gosh, wow, this thing's from 20 years ago when I was a young guy. Now it's like, holy smokes, it actually is fitting in to the picture that we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
So I also think I just, before we wrap up, I don't have any like ulterior motives or agendas here. Like I just like, I'm here doing this work because I feel so strongly about it, and it's for the future of my children and these types of things. I could care less about who clicks and watches my stuff or anything like that. As I said, the work for any activists or anyone listening to this, the work that we do, right? The content that we consume, the information that we consume, the things that we start to understand must also be balanced with action. And we have to act on it. We have to do something as well. Just shouting into the ether and, posting online and getting upset about things. Yeah, it's important to do that, like if you want, but it's not really going to solve anything. What's going to solve things is getting involved.
Mm-hmm.
And people are, and I'm not talking about going out and voting, right? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about getting involved, like boots on the ground, going and speaking to your elected officials and telling them that you're not okay with this. And if all of us do that, guess what? All they care about is getting voted in again. That's all they care about. They don't really care about much else.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a great conversation with my MP, and, it was so interesting because as soon as I had the discussion with her and I wasn't yelling at her and I
Yeah,
wasn't giving her hell. We were just having a conversation. She's like, I really appreciate that you didn't meet me with aggression and anger, and we just had a good talk. And she's like, oh, and it was just such a nice conversation. And then she's like, I hear you. I understand
yeah,
where you're coming from. So, having these discussions with your MP, I think, is important.
yeah. Well, look, I think the other thing, it's. I don't want people to think like, look, I don't have a lot of faith and trust in politics and politicians, okay? And it's not because of the people necessarily; it's because of the machine itself. And so I think that when you
Yeah.
look at your MPs and your local town councillors and stuff, these people have no clue a lot of the time that this stuff is even going on. They have no idea because they're listening from, to Mrs. Jones down the street who's like, I want a stop sign at the end of my street. You know what I mean? And like, especially I live in a small town. So the small town, they're dealing with day-to-day stuff. They're dealing with, should we update the playground? Because there's been a bunch of parents complaining and stuff like that. They're not thinking about friggin' One Health agenda and all sorts of other
Yeah.
craziness. They don't know. And so I think that, you're right. Like when you approach the conversation, not from a combative perspective, but more from an educational perspective, and say, listen, I got some stuff that I'm concerned about and I think you should know about. Like, can we talk? And what we've seen is that a lot of the politicians become quite receptive because they're like, holy smokes, I didn't know that. And
Yes.
B, now that I know that, like, holy smokes, I also have kids. I
Yeah.
also have, so they're not immune aside from maybe the upper echelon. Like they're not immune from the issues that we're talking about here either,
Yeah. Or
you know?
oh, I love my naturopath doctor. Or you know what I'm saying? Like,
Totally, totally. Yeah.
yes.
I mean, we've had a whole bunch of MPs that, they use natural health to take care of themselves and their family. And they're like, now that I understand this is really not a good thing because I'm going to lose access. My family's going to lose access to these things, or whatever. So, I think approaching it from a more human perspective as opposed to, all politicians are crooked and they're all in on the game kind of thing, like it's not a constructive conversation.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. So this has been just, you are a wealth of information, Brett. I love chatting with you. You're such a great speaker and just so well educated. I want to thank you for coming. And I want to, where would you like people to find you? I know you're on Substack, but
Yeah,
everything
pretty
else.
much my home's right now where I'm navigating things without being persecuted too heavily. Really, Substack has been very friendly to me. It's a newer platform for me, so you can just check that out, onwardpod.substack.com, and just look up Onward, and you'll probably find me. And then Instagram as well. So
Okay.
Instagram is really, really busy these days, but I'm finding that I'm getting a lot of traffic there because people are really, people are trying to make sense of the world around them. And I'm not trying to be inflammatory. I'm just presenting things and having the conversation that people are having. That's all. So,
Yeah.
yeah, Instagram and Substack, probably the two best places. Everywhere else is kind of dormant or redundant because I've either been kicked off or I'm shadow banned. So I just don't bother anymore.
Okay. So I think on Instagram, you're the Brett
Yeah,
Pause.
that's right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
said it right,
Yeah.
didn't I? Did I say
You
it right?
did. Yeah. Yeah,
There
you
we go.
did.
I
Good.
got it. I got it finally.
Awesome.
All
Awesome.
right. Thank you so much, Brett. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you. And likewise, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Okay. I hit stop there.